She promised 3 wishes, but his first one shattered the demon goddess's composure. The temple's inner sanctum screamed at Julian Rhodes in 15 different wavelengths. Radiation alarms painted his visor red. Proximity sensors wailed about structural instability. The air itself tasted wrong, thick with particles that had no business existing in nature. He ignored all of it, fingers working the photonic cutter along the seal's final edge. "Just a little more," he muttered, sweat dripping into his eyes despite the suit's climate control. The seal was older than human civilization by a factor of 10. Intricate geometric patterns spiraled across its surface, each line humming with residual energy that made his teeth ache. Every university ethics board, every coalition safety protocol, every shred of common sense said to stop. The entire planet was under quarantine for a reason. 12 previous expeditions had vanished here without a trace. Julian's cutter bit through the last millimeter of ancient metal. The seal didn't break, it screamed. Reality tore. The sound bypassed his ears entirely, reverberating through his bones, his skull, the meat of his brain. The geometric patterns blazed white-hot, then shattered into light that shouldn't exist. The temple convulsed, stone grinding against stone in a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. The air in front of the ruined seal began to burn. Not with fire, with presence. The space folded, compressed, rejected the laws of physics with casual contempt. Heat washed over Julian in waves that made his suit's cooling system whine in protest. The burning air coalesced, solidified, became flesh. She emerged like a blade being drawn. Red skin, the color of arterial blood, caught the temple's dying light. Black horns curved back from her skull in elegant arcs, their surface reflecting nothing. White markings traced patterns across her shoulders, her collarbone, disappearing beneath dark fabric that clung to curves that made Julian's breath catch. Long black hair fell past her waist, moving in a wind that didn't exist. Her eyes opened, gold and ancient and utterly pitiless. Julian's legs forgot how to work. He sat down hard on the stone floor, cutter falling from nerveless fingers. She stretched, and the motion held a predator's grace. Joints popped with sounds like breaking stone. The air around her shimmered with heat distortion, and when she exhaled, her breath misted despite the temple's oppressive warmth. "Finally," she said, voice like silk dragged over steel. Her gaze found Julian, pinned him to the floor with the weight of something vast and old and utterly beyond human comprehension. She took a step forward. The stone beneath her bare feet cracked from the temperature. "You freed me," she continued, head tilting as she studied him with the casual interest of a scholar examining a bug. "How disappointingly fragile you look." Julian's mouth worked. No sound came out. She circled him slowly, each step deliberate. The fabric of her dress whispered against her thighs. Up close he could see that the white markings on her skin weren't painted. They went deep, like scars carved into her very essence. Her presence pressed against his mind, vast and terrible, and utterly controlled. "Can you speak, little archaeologist? Or did the sight of me break something inside that primitive skull?" Julian's voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. "Who are you?" Her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, if it had contained any warmth whatsoever. "I have been called many things. Goddess, demon, destroyer, commander of the last legion, keeper of the dying light." She crouched in front of him, bringing her face level with his. Her eyes were molten gold, flecked with colors that had no names in any human language. "But you may call me Sereth. You've earned that much by breaking my chains." "The seal," Julian managed. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." Sereth reached out, and Julian flinched despite himself. Her fingers, tipped with nails like polished obsidian, caught his chin, turned his face side to side as if examining merchandise. Her skin burned against his. "They never do. 12 expeditions before you, all drawn by curiosity or greed or simple stupidity, all dead before they reached this chamber. But you." Her thumb brushed his cheekbone. "You're different, driven enough to break every law, skilled enough to survive the temple's defenses, obsessed enough to ignore reason." She released him, stood in one fluid motion. "The binding laws are ancient," Sereth said, voice taking on a formal cadence. "Older than your species, older than most civilizations in this galaxy. I was imprisoned under terms that cannot be broken, only transferred. You freed me. Therefore, you are owed. She held up 3 fingers, and they seemed to cut the air itself. 3 wishes, little archaeologist. 3 requests I must fulfill before the binding releases me and I may leave this tomb of a world. Julian's mind raced. 3 wishes. The stuff of fairy tales, of human mythology he'd studied in undergraduate courses a lifetime ago. Except this was real. She was real. The heat radiating from her body was real. The temple around them, still settling from her release, was real. What can you... He stopped, reorganized his thoughts. What are the limits? Clever question. Sareth's smile sharpened. I cannot kill directly. The binding forbids it. I cannot grant you immortality. That's beyond even my power. But knowledge, wealth, technology your species won't develop for millennia, the death of your enemies through careful circumstance, a throne? She leaned forward, voice dropping to something almost intimate. Pleasure beyond anything your limited biology was designed to experience, all within my capabilities. She straightened, and her voice returned to that condescending tone. I've granted these wishes before. I know what your kind wants. You'll ask for power first. They always do. Perhaps the secrets of faster-than-light travel or weapons to make your people dominant. Or maybe you're more base, riches, perhaps. A harem of willing partners sculpted to your exact desires. Her eyes narrowed. Choose wisely. The binding doesn't allow me to refuse, but it also doesn't prevent me from fulfilling your wishes in ways you'll regret. Julian looked at her, really looked. Beneath the power, beneath the predatory grace and the crushing presence, he saw something else. The way her shoulders held themselves too rigidly, the absolute control in every micro-expression, the careful distance she maintained from everything around her, as if connection itself was a threat. He'd spent 15 years studying dead civilizations. He knew what grief looked like, even when it was 10,000 years old. I wish, Julian said slowly, each word deliberate, to truly understand what you lost when your people died. The temperature in the temple spiked 20 degrees in an instant. Sareth's eyes widened, the first genuine expression he'd seen on her face. Her mouth opened, closed. Her hands, which had been so carefully controlled, began to tremble. What did you say? Her voice had gone quiet, dangerous. Your people, Julian continued, pushing himself to his feet despite his shaking legs. I saw the ruins on my way here. This whole planet, it's a graveyard. A civilization that spans solar systems, reduced to empty buildings and silence. I want to understand what that means. What it cost. What you lost. No, the word came out sharp as a blade. Choose something else. That's my wish. You don't understand what you're asking. Then help me understand, that's the point. Sareth's composure, maintained for millennia, perfected through eons of solitude, cracked. Her hands clenched into fists. The white markings on her skin began to glow, pulsing with light that grew brighter with each of her ragged breaths. You stupid, ignorant. She lunged forward, grabbed his shoulders hard enough to bruise even through the suit. Her face was inches from his, and he could see her pupils dilating, contracting, losing focus. You have no idea what you're asking me to feel. To remember, to speak. I have kept it locked away for 5,000 years. 5,000 years of silence, of control, of... She gasped, and the sound was broken in a way that made Julian's chest ache. The binding activated. Golden light erupted from the shattered seal, wrapped around them both like chains made of pure obligation. Sareth tried to pull away, but the light held her in place. Her entire body went rigid. No, she whispered. Please, not this. Anything but this. But the binding didn't care. It never had. Sareth's hand, moving against her will, pressed flat against Julian's chest. Her other hand rose to his temple. The golden light intensified, became blinding. Julian felt her mind crash into his like a tidal wave. The psychic connection slammed open, and suddenly he was drowning in her. Memories not his own flooded through his consciousness, cities of impossible beauty, spires that touched the edges of atmosphere, markets filled with beings whose laughter rang like music. He felt her joy at leading her people, her pride in their achievements, her fierce protective love for every single life under her command. And then he felt them die. But the connection hadn't just opened one way. Sareth's eyes flew wide as Julian's emotions crashed back into her. his empathy, his genuine curiosity, his deep respect for lost civilizations and the people who had built them, his grief, freshly awakened for what she had lost. She experienced human emotion, unfiltered and raw, for the first time in her endless existence. Her composure shattered completely. Sareth's legs buckled. They fell together to the stone floor, still locked in the binding's embrace, and the temple around them began to wake. Ancient mechanisms responded to her breaking control, lights flickering to life throughout the vast structure. Somewhere in the depths, massive engines began to turn. "I can't," Sareth's voice broke. "I can't do this, I can't." But she could. The binding demanded it. And as the wish took hold in full, dragging them both into the deepest chambers of her grief, Sareth began to weep for the first time in 5 millennia. The sound of it echoed through the temple like a dirge. The memories came in waves. Julian gasped as Sareth's past flooded through the psychic link. The capital city rose before him, towers of polished stone catching twin suns' light, gardens hanging between structures, but it wasn't the beauty that hit hardest. It was the life. People filled the streets. Sareth's people. Taller than humans, skin from crimson to burnished copper. They laughed, they lived. Children chased through market squares. Musicians played instruments that sang with harmonics, making his chest ache. "Stop," Sareth's voice came out strangled. The binding wouldn't let her. Julian felt Sareth's pride as she walked through those streets in ceremonial armor. Commander of the last legion. A child ran up, pressed a flower into her hand, darted away giggling. Julian's emotions crashed back, his awe, his grief, his respect. Sareth made a sound like she'd been struck. The binding flared brighter. Her command center, displays showing troop positions across star systems. Her legion numbered millions. "I was good at it," Sareth whispered, "so good at keeping them safe." Then darkness. First reports on a quiet morning, a colony gone silent, everyone dead. Not killed by weapons, just dead, hundreds of thousands fallen. "The plague," Sareth said. "That's what I thought." More colonies fell. Cities. Her legion mobilized, quarantined, burned settlements. Nothing worked. Her people died in waves. Julian experienced her desperation, felt her exhaustion, shared her horror as billions died, and felt her guilt, crushing guilt of a protector who couldn't protect. "I should have saved them." Julian's empathy flooded back. Sareth shook against him. Heat intensified until his suit screamed. The final day came. Sareth stood in her empty command center. Every display showed silence, every city dark, every colony gone. Alone, the last of her kind. Julian felt that realization hit, felt her legs give out, felt her mind fracture. She'd screamed, a sound that shattered windows, then wept, for days, weeks, surrounded by the dead. Through the connection, Julian felt something else buried deep. Fear, not of death or loneliness, but of forgetting, of losing details, of her people fading to vague shapes. That fear drove her to build memory vaults, vast databases containing everything. She preserved it all. Then the coalition came. Julian felt Sareth's brief, desperate hope. Other species, other people, someone to share the burden. That hope lasted exactly as long as the coalition's offer. They would help. All she had to do was sign. Too grief-stricken to read fine print, she signed. The binding activated immediately. Imprisoned, unable to leave or act, the coalition sealed the planet, left her to rot for 5,000 years. The memories slowed, damage done. Sareth had relived every loss while experiencing Julian's reactions. She couldn't hide anymore. Sareth pulled back as golden light faded. They remained on the floor, breathing hard. Her eyes wet, tears cutting tracks through dust. "You had no right," she said, voice hoarse. "I know," Julian managed. "I'm sorry." "Sorry," broken laugh. "You forced me to remember, actually remember, not just know. I kept it distant for millennia. Had to, or I'd go mad," voice cracked. "You made me feel it again." She moved to stand. Legs wouldn't support her. Julian caught her arm. She flinched, from the reminder they'd shared the most intimate experience possible. "Let me go." Julian released her but didn't move away. They sat in renewed light. Above, panels slid open, letting in amber sunlight. "I didn't know it would be like that," Julian said. "The binding interprets literally," Sareth said. "You wanted to understand, so it made sure." Shuddering breath. "Made sure I couldn't hide. from your grief for people you never met. Voice dropped. No one's mourned my people except me. Not in 5,000 years. The admission cost everything. Fresh tears spilled. White markings pulsed with faint light. Julian reached out, then touched her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Heat seeped through his suit. They deserved better, he said. Someone to remember them properly. Sareth turned. The cold goddess gone, someone exhausted and grieving remained. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Feel this and still function. You don't have to do it alone. The words hung between them. Something had changed. A connection formed beyond the binding. Sareth's hand rose slowly. Fingers brushed Julian's face. Touch careful now. She traced tears on his cheek. Her breath caught. You wept for them, she said, wonder in her voice. Why? Because they mattered, Julian replied. Because they lived and loved and built something beautiful. He met her golden eyes. Because you loved them. And I felt that. How could I not grieve? Something broke in Sareth. Not composure, but something deeper. A wall between herself and connection. Her hand moved to his shoulder, gripping tight. I hate you for this, she whispered, no heat in it. Hate that you made me feel. Can't unsee your empathy. You're the first in 5,000 years who's seen something other than a weapon or monster. I see someone who survived something unsurvivable. Sareth's grip tightened. Her other hand came up, suddenly holding him with both hands, forehead dropping to his chest plate. I'm so tired, voice muffled, tired of being strong, of being alone, of pretending the weight doesn't crush me. Julian's arms wrapped around her. She stiffened, then melted against him. Heat intense even through insulation, it felt right. They stayed that way. Two beings from different species, different eras, finding unexpected comfort. The temple continued awakening. Sunlight streamed through panels, turning dust into golden galaxies. Eventually, Sareth pulled back. Eyes still red, but raw agony fading. She looked at Julian with something approaching wonder. I don't understand you, she said. I've granted wishes to dozens of species. All wanted power, control. You could have asked anything, and you chose. She shook her head. You chose to hurt for me. Because understanding matters more than power, Julian said. Your people deserve more than ruins I catalog. Pause. Important to honor them properly. To honor you. Sareth's breath hitched. Her hand rose, cupping his face with gentleness. Thumb brushed his cheekbone. You're so fragile, she murmured. So breakable. One lost moment and I could hurt you, yet you held me. Eyes met his. Very brave or very foolish. Probably both. A sound escaped Sareth. Laughter, genuine laughter. The sound transformed her face, softening lines carved by millennia. Probably both, she repeated. Oh, Julian Rhodes, what have you done to me? Julian, acutely aware of how close they were, her hand cupping his face, golden eyes holding entire universes, heat of her body, breath quick and shallow. Sareth, he said, voice rough. Julian, she replied, his name sending heat through his gut. The moment stretched. Her thumb traced his lower lip, her pupils dilated, air between them charged. Then Sareth pulled back abruptly, rising in one fluid motion. Julian felt the loss. We should explore, she said, voice regaining some control. Thin veneer now. The wish forced me to share memories, but there's more here. Physical evidence, memory vaults I built. She looked down, vulnerability flickering. I want to show you, if you're willing. Julian stood, legs unsteady, entire body wrung out from the connection. But he nodded. Show me. Sareth's expression softened. She held out her hand, an offer, not demand. Julian took it. Their fingers intertwined, and he felt an echo of that earlier connection. Not overwhelming flood, but something gentler. Warmth, awareness beyond the physical. This way, Sareth said, and led him deeper into the temple. They walked through corridors that hadn't seen footsteps in millennia. The architecture was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings covered in intricate carvings, walls that glowed with inner light. Everything was scaled for beings taller than humans. But Sareth's hand in his was an anchor. This was the heart of our civilization, Sareth said. Not just a command center, a repository, a monument to everything we were. The corridor opened to a chamber so vast, Julian couldn't see the far wall. Columns rose like trees, surfaces covered in the same white markings that adorned Sareth's skin. Between them, holographic displays flickered to life. Images filled the air. faces, places, moments frozen in time. The memory vaults, Sareth said. I spent centuries building them, recording everything, every person, every achievement, every mundane moment. Her grip tightened. I was terrified of forgetting. A hologram bloomed before them, a marketplace. Julian could see individual faces, an elderly vendor laughing, two young lovers, a musician mid-song, fingers dancing across strings. I remember her, Sareth said, gesturing to the musician. Velith. She played at my inauguration. Her music could make stone weep. Voice cracked. She died in the first wave. I found her body in the conservatory, still holding her instrument. Julian squeezed her hand. Sareth's eyes were wet, but she didn't look away. Show me more, Julian said softly. Tell me about them. Sareth moved through the chamber, holograms shifting with her. Each image came with a story, sometimes just a name and fragment, sometimes entire lifetimes. A scientist who'd mapped distant stars, a teacher who'd made Sareth laugh during training, a child who'd drawn pictures of the Legion's victories. Julian listened to every word, asked questions, made connections between elements and artifacts he'd catalogued. And slowly something shifted in Sareth's expression. The raw grief was still there, but joined by something else. Warmth, joy in the remembering. She laughed, describing a stubborn council member who'd argued with her for 3 hours. She smiled, showing him festival recordings. You're really listening, Sareth said, wonder in her voice. Not just hearing, actually listening. Of course, Julian replied. This is incredible. Your people, they were remarkable. They were ordinary, Sareth said. That's what makes it remarkable. They weren't gods or legends, just people trying to live good lives. She touched one hologram, a family around a table. This matters just as much as any great deed, maybe more. They continued deeper. Sareth showed him art galleries, music libraries, scientific archives. She talked about philosophy debates that raged for generations, recipes passed down, children's games in streets that no longer existed. I never thought I'd share this, Sareth admitted. The coalition representatives, they didn't care. They saw only data, resources to exploit, never asked about the people. Then they were fools, Julian said. Sareth stopped walking, turned to face him fully, studying his face. Her hand came up to cup his cheek. You're dangerous, Julian Rhodes, she said softly. You make me want things I'd forgotten I could want. Hope, connection, a future that's more than just existence. Is that so terrible? It is when, Sareth's words cut off as a holographic display flickered red. Her entire body went rigid. No? What is it? The temple's perimeter sensors, voice gone cold. Something's approaching, multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Julian's blood ran cold. The coalition? Who else? Sareth moved to the display, fingers flying across controls. Data streamed past. They must have automated alerts. The moment I broke free, the moment the temple activated, she slammed her hand against the display. They've had 5,000 years to prepare. How many ships? 12 in the initial wave, more jumping in. Eyes blazed with fury. A kill squad, they're here to eliminate any witnesses. Raced. How long? Hours, maybe less. Sareth turned to him, expression tormented. Julian, I need to tell you something. The binding, it's loosening, but not gone. I'm still tied to you until all 3 wishes are made. I can't leave this planet without you. Can't even use my full power without risking your life. Then we figure this out together. You don't understand. Sareth grabbed his shoulders, desperate. They'll kill you to get to me. You're human. Your species joined the coalition. They'll paint you as a rogue agent. No one will question your death. Julian met her gaze steadily. So what do we do? Sareth stared at him. Then something shifted. Determination. We find the truth, she said. Real, undeniable truth. You saw the pattern. I've had 5,000 years to study what happened. I know where the evidence is. Weapon signatures, orders, communications during the genocide. Voice took on a razor edge. I know exactly what they did and who gave the orders. Can we access it in time? The main archives are in the lower chambers. It'll take time, but eyes narrowed. If we can get the data compiled and transmitted before they arrive, it doesn't matter what happens to us. The truth will be out there. Transmitted where? Everywhere. Every coalition world. Every independent system. Every news network and data hub. Smile fierce. They built the binding into a contract, used ancient laws against me. But those same laws have loopholes. If I can prove they violated the terms, that they imprisoned me under false pretenses, covered up genocide, the binding shatters, and so does their authority. Julian's heart hammered. How do I help? The archives are encoded with genetic locks. I need my DNA to access them, but the retrieval systems were damaged. Sareth's hand found his again. I need someone who understands ancient technology, an archaeologist who's spent his career piecing together dead civilizations. I can do that, Julian said immediately. It'll be dangerous. The lower chambers are unstable, and if the coalition arrives before we finish, Grip tightened. Julian, I can't guarantee your safety. I can barely control my power. The rage, the grief, it's all so close. I know, Julian said. I trust you anyway. Sareth's breath caught. She pulled him close, foreheads touching. The heat intense, but Julian didn't pull away. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk everything for people you never knew? For me? Because it's right, Julian said. Because your people deserve justice. Because you deserve to be free. He pulled back to meet her eyes. And because I've spent 15 years studying the dead. Maybe it's time I help the living. Something fierce and tender bloomed in Sareth's expression. She kissed him, quick, intense, full of promise and desperation. When she pulled back, her eyes blazed. Then let's go prove I'm not the monster they made me believe I was, she said. Let's show them what happens when you try to bury the truth. She led him toward a passage descending deeper. As they walked, Julian's mind spun. The coalition was coming. They had hours at most. And he was about to help an ancient alien goddess expose a genocide that could shake galactic civilization. But as Sareth's hand tightened around his, warm and real and alive, Julian knew he'd made the right choice. Some truths were worth dying for, and some people were worth living for. The passage opened into a vast chamber. Unlike the vaults above, this space was dark, filled with massive crystalline structures pulsing with faint light. Archive cores, thousands of them, stretching into shadows. The evidence is in there, Sareth said, gesturing to the cores. Everything they did, every order, every ship that participated. She looked at Julian. Help me wake them up. Help me show the galaxy what the coalition really is. Julian stepped forward, his archaeologist's mind already analyzing the technology. Let's get to work, he said. Sareth smiled, fierce, beautiful, and full of hope for the first time in 5,000 years. Thank you, she whispered. Then they descended into the archives together, racing against time and an approaching fleet, searching for truth in the darkness. Julian's fingers flew across the ancient interface, decoding crystalline matrices that hadn't been accessed in millennia. Sweat dripped down his face. Beside him, Sareth fed her genetic signature into the archive cores, hands steady despite the tension radiating from her. This one's corrupted, Julian muttered. The data's fragmented. Skip it, Sareth said. We need enough evidence to prove the genocide, not every detail. Focus on command logs and weapon signatures. Julian shifted to a different archive. This one pulsed with steady light. He interfaced his scanner, and information streamed across his display. Ship manifests, targeting coordinates, kill confirmations. His stomach turned. Sareth, you should see this. She moved to his side. Her breath caught. The core contained communications between coalition fleet commanders, discussing colony targets, civilian populations, optimal strike patterns for maximum casualties with minimum evidence. They'd planned it, methodically, efficiently. The Kelthara colony, Sareth whispered. They debated biological weapons or kinetic strikes, decided on biological because it would look like natural plague. Her voice shook. They murdered 3 billion people and treated it like a logistical problem. Julian's hand found hers, squeezing tight. We'll make sure everyone knows. They worked in tense silence, pulling data from core after core. Each revealed new horrors, orders signed by coalition council members, cover-up protocols, plans to imprison Sareth. This wasn't just genocide. It was premeditated, authorized at the highest levels. Why? Julian asked. Why did they do this? Sareth's laugh was bitter. We were powerful. Our legion could have stood against any coalition force. And we had principles. We wouldn't join them, wouldn't subjugate weaker species. Her fingers clenched around a crystal. We were an example, a reminder that power could be used for protection rather than domination. They couldn't tolerate that. So they eliminated you and made it look like tragedy. Sareth's eyes blazed. They presented themselves as saviors, quarantined the plague world, imprisoned the dangerous survivor. They built their authority on my people's corpses. Julian's scanner beeped. I've got enough. Command logs, weapon signatures, authenticated communications, ironclad evidence. Then we transmit, Sareth said. Her fingers danced across controls. I'm routing it through every relay in range. The Coalition won't be able to suppress this. The temple shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. What was that? Sareth's face went pale. They're here, firing on the surface, trying to collapse the temple before we can transmit. Another impact, closer. The crystalline archives rang like bells. How long do you need? 5 minutes to compile, another 3 to transmit. Sareth's hands moved faster. The temple's shields will hold. A massive explosion shook the chamber. One archive core shattered, spraying Julian with fragments. Sareth grabbed him, pulling him away from the collapsing structure. They're trying to destroy the archives, she said. They know what we're doing. Can they stop the transmission? Not if I finish it. Sareth's eyes met his. But I need to use my power, full power. I can shield you, but you have to stay close. Don't let go. Julian nodded. Sareth pulled him against her, one arm wrapped around his waist. Her other hand continued working the controls. Heat radiated from her in waves. The white markings on her body blazed with light. Outside, explosions, closer, louder. The Coalition forces weren't bothering with precision anymore. Almost there, Sareth muttered. The chamber's entrance exploded inward. Armed figures in Coalition battle armor poured through, weapons raised. Stand down, the lead soldier shouted. Sareth's power erupted. The temperature spiked 50 degrees. The air seemed to ignite. A wave of force exploded outward from Sareth's body, catching the soldiers mid-advance. Armor melted. Weapons fused to slag. The soldiers flew backward, crashing into walls. Julian gasped, overwhelmed by the proximity to such raw power. But Sareth's arm around him held steady, her shield protecting him. He felt the heat, the pressure, but it didn't burn. Transmissions away, Sareth said, voice strained. It's done. The data's spreading across every network. Up. More soldiers poured through. Sareth moved in front of Julian, putting herself between him and the incoming fire. Energy blasts splashed against barriers of superheated air. We need to move, she said. There's an emergency passage behind that far wall. How do you know they haven't surrounded us? I don't. Sareth's smile was fierce. But I'm done running, done hiding, and especially done letting the Coalition dictate what happens next. She pulled Julian toward the far wall, her power blazing around them. The soldiers tried to follow, but Sareth gestured and a section of ceiling collapsed, blocking their pursuit. They reached the wall. Sareth pressed her hand against it, and ancient mechanisms activated. The stone split, revealing a narrow passage. She pushed Julian through, then followed, sealing the entrance. The passage was cramped and dark, lit only by the glow of Sareth's markings. They ran, Julian's legs burning. Behind them, muffled explosions as Coalition forces tried to breach the seal. They're going to bring the whole temple down, Julian panted. Let them try, Sareth said. The transmission's already propagating. By now it's hit a dozen relay stations. By the time we reach the surface, it'll be on 100 worlds. The passage sloped upward. Julian's lungs screamed, but he pushed harder. Sareth's hand in his pulled him forward. They emerged onto the surface just as the temple complex began to collapse. Coalition ships circled overhead, weapons tearing into the ancient structure. But it was too late. The evidence was out. Julian and Sareth stood at the edge of the destruction, watching the temple, her last connection to her people, crumble. I'm sorry, Julian said quietly. Don't be. Sareth's voice was steady. The memory vaults are gone, but they served their purpose. My people's story will be told now. Their deaths will be avenged. She turned to him, smiling despite everything. Because of you. Sareth, we're not safe yet. I know. She pulled him close. Julian, I need to ask you something. The second wish, you still have it, and I need you to use it now. What do you want me to wish for? Sareth's eyes met his, fierce and vulnerable. I wish for you to have the choice, Julian said. True choice, free from any binding or obligation of what happens next. The golden light of the binding flared around them. Sareth gasped as the chains loosened further. She could feel it, the freedom, the possibility. She could leave, could escape, could save herself, and let Julian face the consequences alone. But she didn't move, didn't let go. My choice, she said softly, is to stay. Julian's heart hammered. Sareth, my choice is to fight. My choice is you. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of promise. When she pulled back, her eyes blazed. Now let's show them what happens when you back a goddess into a corner. Coalition ships descended toward their position, but Sareth smiled, power building around her like a storm. And for the first time in 5,000 years, she wasn't alone. The coalition ships descended like predators circling wounded prey. Julian counted at least 20, their weapons arrays glowing with lethal intent. Behind them, the temple, 5,000 years of history and memory, burned. Stay behind me, Sareth said, her voice steady despite the impossible odds. Power coiled around her like living fire, the white markings on her skin blazing bright. We're outnumbered 20-1, Julian said. I don't need to beat them, Sareth interrupted. I just need to buy time. The transmission's spreading. Every second we survive, more people see the truth. The lead ship's speakers crackled. Surrender the human and stand down. You cannot win this, Sareth. Sareth's laugh was cold. Commander Rel, I presume? I've had 5,000 years to think about what I'd say when we finally met. You're bound by ancient law. You cannot kill. You cannot... The binding's breaking, Sareth said. Thanks to Julian's wishes, I'm almost free. And when I am, Commander, you'll learn why my people called me their protector. The ships opened fire. Sareth's power exploded outward. The air itself became a weapon, superheated barriers that vaporized incoming blasts, pressure waves that sent missiles tumbling. She moved with fluid grace, one hand directing shields while the other pulled Julian close. I need you to trust me, she said urgently. Completely. Can you do that? Julian nodded. Sareth's hand found his face. The third wish, Julian, I need it now. What do you want me to wish for? Her golden eyes met his, and in them Julian saw 5,000 years of pain, but he also saw hope, joy, love. I wish for the truth of what happened here to be known, Julian said, in a way that protects both our peoples. The binding shattered. Golden light erupted from Sareth's body. When Julian opened his eyes, she was floating, hair whipping around her face. The chains that had held her for millennia were gone. She was free. And she was magnificent. Thank you, she whispered and kissed him, gentle, full of promise. Then she turned to face the coalition fleet, her voice ringing out with the authority of a goddess. I am Sareth, commander of the last legion, last survivor of a people you murdered. Her words carried across the battlefield. You thought you could bury the truth. You were wrong. The ships hesitated. Sareth gave them no time. She rose higher, power building around her like a second sun. The ground beneath their feet began to crack, ancient mechanisms responding to her will. Defense grids her people had built awakened. You have a choice, Sareth called out. Stand down and face justice, or fight and learn why the coalition feared my people enough to exterminate us. We have our orders, Rel's voice crackled back. You're to be eliminated. Then you've chosen poorly. Sareth's power detonated. Julian watched in awe as she moved through the coalition fleet like a force of nature. She didn't kill, but she didn't need to. Ships lost power, weapons fused, armor buckled under impossible heat. She was everywhere at once, a blazing figure of vengeance. But there were so many ships. Despite her power, Sareth was still alone. Not alone. Julian's hand went to his communicator. This is Julian Rhodes, xenoarchaeologist. I'm standing on a planet the Coalition quarantined under false pretenses. They committed genocide here 5,000 years ago. If anyone's receiving this, if anyone cares about the truth, we need help. We need witnesses. For a long moment, nothing. Then his communicator exploded with responses. Ships were jumping into the system. Not just a few, dozens. Independent vessels, free traders, even some from Coalition member worlds whose crews had seen the transmission. The Coalition fleet suddenly found itself outnumbered. "Stand down," came a new voice, strong, authoritative, female. "This is Captain Saris of the independent cruiser Starborn. We've seen the evidence. We know what you did. The entire galaxy knows." Rel's voice came back, confidence gone. "This is a coalition matter." "This is a genocide," Captain Saris interrupted, "and we're not letting you cover up another one." The coalition ships held position for another moment. Then, slowly, they began to retreat. Not all, a few diehards tried to fight, but Surith dealt with them efficiently, surgically, without a single death. When the last coalition ship limped out of the system, Sarith descended back to the surface. She landed beside Julian, her power dimming to a soft glow. She looked exhausted but alive in a way she hadn't been before. "You called for help," she said, wonder in her voice. "You said you didn't have to do it alone anymore," Julian replied. Sarith pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. They'd survived, they'd won. The truth was out. Ships were landing now. Journalists, investigators, independent observers. They'd want statements, evidence, testimony. But for now, Julian and Sarith simply held each other as the sun set over the ruins of her world. "What happens next?" Julian asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarith admitted. "For 5,000 years, all I wanted was freedom and revenge. Now I have one and don't need the other." She pulled back to look at him. "What do you want to happen next?" Julian thought about his life before, cataloging ruins, studying dead civilizations, always alone. Then he looked at Sarith. "I want to help you rebuild," he said. "Not your civilization, that's gone, but something new. A memorial, a place where people can learn about your people, honor them properly. And I want," he hesitated, "I want to see where this goes, between us." Sarith's smile was radiant. "A memorial? I like that." Her hand found his face. "And as for where this goes, Julian Rhodes, I've had 5,000 years to forget how to hope, how to love, how to trust. You taught me all three in a matter of hours." She leaned in close. "I'm not sure what we are or what we'll become, but I know I want to find out." She kissed him as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, as ships landed around them, as the galaxy learned the truth. It was a kiss full of promise, of possibility, of a future neither had thought possible. When they finally broke apart, Captain Saris was approaching with a recording device. "Ready to tell your story?" she asked. Sarith looked at Julian. He squeezed her hand. Together, they turned to face the galaxy. "Yes," Sarith said. "It's time the universe knew what really happened here. Time they knew about my people, not as victims, but as they truly were. Protectors, builders, dreamers." She took a breath, and Julian felt her hand tighten around his. "My name is Sarith," she began, "and this is the story of a civilization the galaxy forgot." As she spoke, Julian watched her transform. The grief was still there, the anger, the pain, but it no longer defined her. She was more than the last survivor of a dead species. She was a woman who'd learned to hope again, to love again, to live again. And when she finished her testimony hours later, when the journalists had their footage and the investigators had their evidence, Sarith turned to Julian with a smile that held all the warmth of twin suns. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." "Thank you," Julian replied, "for letting me help, for trusting me, for choosing to stay." "Always," Sarith said. They stood together at the edge of the ruins, watching as the first dawn in 5,000 years broke over a world that would finally be remembered for what it was. The temple was gone, the memory vaults were destroyed, but the truth lived on. And so did they. Together,